Gautier. Brou, if you could please join us. Very excited to have Brou with us. Brou Gautier serves as Chief Continuous Process Improvement and Innovation Leader at the United States Air Force with its headquarters in Washington, D.C. He is responsible for the development, training, and deployment of continuous process improvement and innovation concepts across the department in a way that fosters innovation, solves performance issues, and transforms the culture with particular emphasis on end-to-end processes. Prior to his current role, Mr. Gautier was a commissioned officer and a pilot in the U.S. Air Force and a consultant and business director for a privately held Lean Six Sigma consulting company. Brou, it's a real pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for sharing your immense expertise with all of us today.
Oh, thank you, Jose. It's my good fortune to be with you here today, with all of you, and I hope I'm able to bring some value to the conversation. So, Jose, if I could get you to just confirm that you're seeing my presentation, and we can go from there.
You're looking good.
All right, thank you very much. So, I'd often asked about this question. You know, Jose mentioned it in his opening comments. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. What an awesome observation that just strikes the core of truth with all of us, doesn't it? And we find out as we go through this journey for the Air Force exactly how come we have so many strategies to improve, yet we find out that sometimes maybe like a diet, we often go backwards every so often. And there are lots of reasons for that. But I wanted to dive down into a little bit of this to share with you a little bit about our organization and the opportunity before us and the steps we're taking to kind of make sure that we progress solidly in towards the future without as many slide backs as we've experienced in the past. So when I bring this first slide up, I always like to say, you know, in business, one of the common things I have to tackle is business profit is a motive, but in government, profit is not a motive, right? And I hear that often as a way of people saying, you know, what you do from the business world will never work in government because we're just not motivated by the same things. And I actually take exception to that because at the end of the day, the profit equation, you know, revenue minus cost equals profit, really converts into this type of an equation. Revenue minus converted capability is zero. And, you know, we have a government mindset. All government, or maybe perhaps bureaucratic organizations, tend to look at the revenues that come in for their budgets as we have to spend every dollar. That's true. Because every dollar is dedicated for a specific purpose and outcome. So the question, though, is how effective are you at converting that money into capability? You know, the reason that you exist. And that's the fundamental question that drives our team and our organization at helping our folks understand that, you know, the budget and the money issue is one thing. It's an obligation to make sure that the money received is converted as fully and as productively as it can be into capabilities. So at the end of the day, I'll just rephrase it as this. How can we make the most of our set funding to be responsible stewards of never forgetting that these are taxpayers' hard-earned dollars? And it's that kind of a sacred viewpoint that we have to hold dear to our hearts. We can't ever take our customers for granted in business. We in government can't take our taxpayers for granted either, because there's a limited supply of tax dollars and burden that we can execute and commit and still expect to be viewed as reasonable stewards of the tax dollars. So how do you do that, right? How do you convert that, do that, to have that capability conversation? And the question for us really resonates with this concept of performance excellence. You know, and I've got a little cloud here where, you know, yeah, it's a little bit about optimizing spend. Yeah, it's a little bit about making sure that we retain the right and best employees to minimize transfer of labor. Profitability is that weird word for government, but again, we can define profitability in terms of capability improvements, right? If I can take a given budget and I can increase my capability 2x or 10x, would you say that I'm being profitable with the assets that I'm given? Am I being a good steward of that? Speaking of stewardship, are we taking care of all of the assets, all the physical plant, all the capital equipment, all of those things that businesses have to wrestle with and use to provide services and products? We do the same thing to provide a service known as Air Force capabilities. So I'll offer you that most people, when they say the Air Force, you know, and when Jose was opening up, I even myself had visions of this, or the airplanes that I used to fly behind, kind of on the wall behind me there. People tend to think of our aircraft or our space operations, our rockets and our satellites as what the Air Force is. But I would just offer that that is what we produce. That's not necessarily who we are. When you think about that, the reality is that the Air Force is far bigger than just those capabilities that you see as the fruit of our effort, right? For instance, we have 90 bases spread throughout the entire world. So read that as 90 different cities. And those cities have on them airports ranging from small regional airports to international airports to intragalactic spaceports, if you will. And the Air Force, our airmen and our space professionals are responsible for providing everything associated with that city. So we have, for instance, firefighters, we have medical folks, we have maintainers who get to fix the aircraft that they so lovingly accused me of breaking intentionally so that they would have work to do back in my flying days. We have airmen who, in this case, in the lower right, who are digging trenches to put in water pipelines to make sure that the service for that airport goes uninterrupted. In this location, it's in an expeditionary or temporary location, so we have to have those skill sets as well. And I've got a dog up there. You know, that's not just for all of you pet lovers because somebody told me to have a dog in the presentation somewhere. What that in reality is most people don't recognize that the Air Force is actually the enterprise manager for the entire federal government of the United States for all working dogs, whether that's drug detection dogs, bomb detection dogs, that kind of stuff. We run the program that trains and acquires and trains and manages working dogs. Now, did you ever imagine that when you're thinking about what our Air Force is and how it looks like and who comprises it? Probably not. You didn't realize that you could join the Air Force, in fact, and be a dog handler. That just doesn't compute normally. But I say that because I just want to give you a bigger idea about this expanse and scope of the skills. All told, there's about 150 different specialties that come together to produce the effects that you see on our glamour end of air and space operations. All told, we're comprised of about 685,000 people. So 328 or so active duty, 228,000 active duty, 145 or so civilians that go into full-time employees. And we've got some part-time employees through our Air National Guard and our Air Force Reserve components. And then that doesn't include the thousands of people that we have available to us in contract operations, through contract operations. So all told, about 685,000 full-time and part-time employees who do the work required to produce the effects of our air and space forces. So I just said that in a little weird way too. Did y'all catch that? It's been all over the news of late, but I just wanted to point out that this year, 2020, is the first full year of operational existence for the United States Space Force. So back in December of 2019, the President and the Secretary of the Air Force got together and Congress approved, and we separated out from the United States Air Force a force specifically dedicated to the United States space operations and space mission. So now we have both underneath the Department of the Air Force umbrella, both the Air Force and the Space Force. And the numbers of people and physical plant didn't grow necessarily because we have an extra kind of set of a team at the leadership level. But what that does is, you know, it kind of complicates things a little bit for us as we try to figure out how now do we have these different conversations across two different sets of decision makers. And a lot of you may resonate with you if you're perhaps in operations and you're supporting two different lines of effort or two different business units. It's the same kind of a thing. I don't know if you have this big of a footprint to do that with, but that's the organization that we have. That's the organization known as the Department of the Air Force. All that physical plant and capital equipment. So I put this up here as kind of a segue into making sure that we keep focused on this goal of achieving maximum capability from every tax dollar, from every asset, every physical plant asset that we have. It's precious to us. So we can acquire things. We have nobody ever disputes the military's ability to buy new things. We also have to take all those things that we buy and we integrate them into the system that produces all the effects that you know as our Air Force and our capabilities out there. But we also look at making sure that we have to maintain those assets over the course of a lifetime. So we have all of those folks who are dedicated to making sure that the physical plant and capital equipment, all of the machines, they break a lot. Especially, the average age, those airplanes that I flew back there, the earliest one I flew, and I think it's still flying today, is a 1958 model, built in 1958 and put in service then, and we've been flying it now for well over 50 years. That's incredible to me, and it's a testimony to how talented our maintenance force is at making sure that we take all those assets and we achieve every single thing that we can from it in terms of our max capability and capacity. Those are the things we're talking about. How do you increase the productivity, not just of people, but of assets? How do you build that culture where good enough? I hate that. I bristle every time I kind of think of that phrase. Some people say, oh, 80% mission capable rate, that's good enough. Or 75, hey, it's a 52-year-old airplane. 75% mission capability is good enough. Well, how do you manage them? How do you decide what is the most productive or the best productivity you can get out of any asset? And the issue is that we have a number of folks who can do those calculations, but the reality that I faced was simply that we didn't have anybody that made sure that every single one of those 685,000 employees had productivity skin in the game, right? They weren't necessarily on the hook to think about how productive they were with their time, how productive they were with the tools, how productive their tools were, right? How productive all those assets are. And they weren't thinking about that. Well, why is that? Well, because there's endless competition for the things that we have to think about. Every airman, and we can't ever forget, is an individual. And those individuals have family concerns, they have money concerns, they have home concerns, they have school concerns, professional development, personal development. All of those things kind of come in and compete for space in our heads as we try to figure out and how to also become really good at doing my job. Well, the issue is sometimes you come in as an employee, and this is one of the first things we started trying to work on with our continuous process improvement innovation deployment model, is to make sure that we understood and where airmen were in assessing themselves at how valuable they were to the equation. And one of the things that we came up with was some old tried and true information on assessing employee engagement and happiness. And many of you probably know about the Gallup's Q12, or the 12 questions that are most statistically relevant at helping an employer gauge insight as to whether or not their employees are engaged and satisfied and happy. Most of them have nothing to do with money, for instance, and we probably knew that. But many of them, or at least 4 of them are captured here. But there are 12 questions that help you get to that. And I'll say that for me, if you reflect on those questions, and you'll come down to a point where you realize that at the end of the day, it's really one double-edged question that we want to understand how airmen believe and feel, is that do they believe the work they do is of value to the organization? And do they believe that the work they do is valued by the organization? Now, that's a pretty simple way of boiling it down. Those 12 Gallup's Q12 questions kind of get you into that a little finer detail. But ultimately, does the organization put in place a system that helps airmen clearly see the value in what they're doing? And as it relates to the big capability, does every dog handler understand their role in producing combat effects or combat firepower or space operations or secure port operations? Does every fireman understand that their primary purpose is to respond in the case things go wrong, right? Whether that's a fire type issue or a medical emergency, a paramedic type emergency. Those are the types of connectivity things. Do you believe that the mission and the work that you do is of value to the organization? And then the second thing is that, do you believe that the organization values the work you do and bring something to the table to kind of prove that? So how does the organization prove that it values its people? So one of the first things that Secretary Barrett and General C.Q. Brown, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and General J. Raymond, the Chief of Space Operations, one of the things that they go out of their way to make sure everyone in the Air Force knows from top to bottom is that the Air Force values its employees and their contributions to the work we do. It's critical and it's important work. And they want to make sure that everyone can connect to that work in a way that makes them and helps them apply their natural talents, takes that and converts it into the combined effects of our air and space forces. So that's an important thing. That underlies a respect for people, which I believe is common to all of the Lean and Six Sigma deployment models that I've studied throughout my career. Respect for people, that's got to be core one. Respect for what people bring to the table, respect for their insight, and respect for their knowledge as subject matter experts. We have to listen, and in listening, we can learn a lot, right? So one of the things that we found when our team is in charge of the continuous improvement and innovation deployment model, is that we didn't seem to be thinking like an enterprise. And how do I have evidence of that? So one of the things I would say is, if I take one of those people who is responsible for producing, building the city and maintaining the city, is take something as simple as an air conditioner, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, HVAC. For many, it would be easy to just say, yeah, it's a building, there's moisture, there's humidity, there's climate control and temperature, there's computers inside that need to be protected. So we have to have an operational air conditioning unit. Okay, and so it's pretty easy to we have to build a concrete pad, we have to install an air conditioner and have to do that. Oftentimes though, we'll rely on a contract partner to come in and provide the equipment, maybe even to do some of the install work supervised by a government technician. But is that a transactional thing? Right, yeah. But what can we learn from that? Well, turns out we weren't learning a whole lot. It was viewed as a discrete operation. Can you imagine with that global footprint of 90 different cities with regional to major airports, how many air conditioners we buy? Yeah, it's a lot. And what we found is that people weren't thinking about all of this together as a system. So every one of those air conditioning contracts was built as if it was a standalone thing. And the lessons learned from this air conditioning contract were not the same as lessons learned at the other 89 bases where air conditioning contracts were in place. In fact, would it surprise you to learn that at even one base, we would have up to 4 or 5 different contracts just to do procurement and installation and maintenance of air conditioning systems. Wow. Different contracts on the same base. They're all set at different times, perhaps by different people, and they all had different purposes and durations, et cetera, slightly different. But no one was really thinking about air conditioning in this example as at the enterprise level. So what does that mean? That means that you have that initial product cost, but all of those hidden costs of doing things that are below the surface on our iceberg example here, we were one-off, unique, individual items that we were trying to think through and dispose of independently. Oh my goodness, how ripe of an opportunity is that to make some sense of it and get our arms around some of the costs, make sure that our dollars are being productive. So leaning on the best ideas in industry about looking at category management, and as part of a federal government initiative, the Air Force has been all in understanding and learning about category management, or strategically managing our costs. And so we start diving down into little things. And we understand that, if an HVAC is an HVAC, then it might make sense that we have one kind of person who's the subject matter expert and responsible for all that HVAC knowledge. And we build some other people around them that can take their place should something bad happen. But we want to make sure that the knowledge is kept and maintained and dispersed widely as possible. So when you start doing that, you start categorizing your spend, you start assigning that cost of ownership, you develop a category cost manager, and then you start developing business intelligence, and you share that intelligence across your enterprise. And you think, okay, well, how much could that really drive if you just did that with air conditioners? Well, maybe not a whole lot, but how about if you did elevators? Elevators go up and down. Would it shock you to know that we had the same contract structures in place for elevators? And how about for any other thing you can buy? All those different categories of purchases, same thing. So just our efforts to date, we've already produced $1.65 billion in savings and cost avoidance by getting our arms around the strategic business intelligence that we can gather and applying our cost and buying principles across the enterprise for all of those installations. Wow, 1.65 billion. Does that get anybody's attention? Yeah, well, now that's 1.65 billion that we had in the past written off kind of as a cost of doing business. But now with our newer model, our newer way of thinking, this cultural respect for the productivity of the dollars as an asset, now we're able to take those 1.65 billion and apply them to something else. That helps us because we often reflect that there's a fundamental axiom when it comes to money. And that axiom is that, let's break the Air Force into two different capability areas. One is the tooth that everybody sees as the operational effect side of the Air Force, and the other is the tail that goes together to produce the effects and counterbalance and weight and give force to the tooth that we use to do our operations with. So a fundamental axiom of our principles are that a dollar spent in tail is not available to spend in tooth. And guess what? That dollar is precious. So now through efforts like category management, we've been able to take 1.65 billion previously spent in tail and free it up to be allocated where necessary in tooth and in driving efficiency and other operations inside the tail of the Air Force. So everybody, here's one of our folks that helped me put this together said, when I think of the Air Force, I get nostalgic. September 18th, 1947, we're coming up on an anniversary, an important anniversary for us. And we think about all of those things that we've been doing over time. But those of us in the continuous improvement business, we tend to look at this as something a little bit different. I see that over time, we've made decisions. For instance, we've made decisions and specifically in the IT world. Would it surprise you to know that we bought hundreds of systems over the years? We've disposed of hundreds of systems, but our current state, when we started looking at this about a year ago or 2 years ago, we found that we have about 450 business systems in that tail section of the Air Force that only produce 309 unique outcomes. I got to pause for that for a second for effect and let that sink in. We invested in 450 different IT systems that only produce 309 unique outcomes. So the primary reason for that, none of it was malicious, none of it was badly motivated. All of it could be assignable to the fact that we weren't under communicating, perhaps, that we weren't managing systems as a category, that we weren't looking at, well, managing a widget here and tracking it, buying it, and then storing it, and then dispersing it so that it can go and do its thing later. That's the same as buying and storing and dispensing it over here, right? So we weren't looking at that, and one installation may create their own system and another installation create their other system. And as well as I do that if we have all of these independent systems out there effectively doing the same thing, you could be close, but you're not going to necessarily achieve the full productivity of the dollars used to help fund and buy those systems. So that's one of the big one of the big tasks that we've taken on today is to help bring that down a little bit. I don't know what the right number of systems is. I don't even know what the right number of outcomes is. Usually the outcomes grows, right? But our hope is that this equation for this ultimately is N number of systems in the future equals or is less than or equal to the number of outcomes, 309 plus Y, some number of growth outcomes in the future. The fundamental axiom and principle that we're driving towards from our business systems manufacturer implementation plans effectively are to say, the principle is we need fewer systems to do more things. Does that make sense? Yeah, absolutely common sense. And putting that in policy to make sure that people respected the system purchasing and buying and the productivity of those dollars is a harder thing. So that's where we end up coming right now. That's our goal, and that's what we're working towards. So how do you do that? One of the things we found is, I mentioned we've got about 73 years, almost 73 years of expertise doing it the way we've always done it. Oh my goodness, how many of you have ever had, but this is the way we've always done this. We've always gone to the system and we've always done this thing. We've always asked the customer to give us their name, their social security number, or their ID number, their address, their date of birth, and blah, 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 on a form every time they interact with us. So my question to them was, how many times does the taxpayer need to pay for us to ingest all of this information that we already know about this employee, right? Those systems that we have already have every ounce of data that you can imagine about me. It knows that I have a Bachelor of Science degree, but yet the system that governs my personal employment right now doesn't have record of the fact that that bachelor's degree is in some other Air Force system. It's up to me to connect those two, me as the customer, me as the end user. And that reflects this fundamental premise that every encounter that we have ends up being a unique data point that can only be captured new and at that point of service. And that's one of the models that we're trying to break culturally. We want to respectfully say that name, date of birth, social security number, all of that information is in this data structure. And here, that's the authoritative data for that. And if you need it, then you can scan my ID card and it'll go and put a call into that system and pull up my information right there. And you can just say, is this all still correct? Do you still live at this house? Are you still born on this day? Is this still your social security number, right? Did you get married or anything? Those kinds of things, they change the way we ask the questions, but our people don't necessarily feel empowered to help make sense of that. And we're changing that. We just launched a new campaign in our innovation space called Rise of the Digital Wingman, where we're asking airmen to say, point out what stupid looks like on your IT systems. What is it that doesn't have respect for you, your time as an IT user, or the customer's time from an information upload, download management perspective? How many different times do we have to capture and store the same information? Oh, it's mind-boggling. But we're asking those kinds of questions now, and we're not going to be we're not going to rest easy when we get the answer. That's the way we've always done it. That's our challenge. That's opportunity. So what we're doing now with this Rise of the Digital Airman is we're challenging our airmen to say, hey, show us where stupid is happening and you believe that the work you're doing is of no value to the organization. And they're identifying it and they're shouting out loud. We've got about 20 different robotic process automation events underway with our RPA partners. And they're helping us understand where we can employ and do things and save us from doing the dull and monotonous things that we don't need to be doing anymore. Now, some of you may be thinking, actually, I know a couple of folks in the audience are friends of mine and I know them, colleagues, and they say, Brou, you were on record as having said, careful, IT can make stupid happen at the speed of light. Absolutely right, and I haven't changed that position. IT can make stupid happen at the speed of light. And I'll tell you that one of the reasons that we got into this predicament was because we all felt that our stuff was special and unique and different. And it could not be handled by the way that we think about things today. You can only handle it the way we think about things, right? We brought in systems engineers, software experts who knew, well, I just have to connect. Once I have the identifying piece of information, my ID card number, I can pull your information out of the normal system of record, the authoritative data. I can just ask you to verify it. I don't need to store it separately, but people would insist, no, you don't understand our process. Our process, we have to capture the name and the social and blah, blah, blah. And what we found is that our people, the way we've always done it, that culture started eating our strategy for our systems build strategy for breakfast. And we slaved systems engineers into building, coding unique systems that did things the way we did them, always, since 1947, the way we thought about it, not allowing them to employ new modern data thinking techniques. So we're baby steps at saying this is not acceptable, and we're going a different direction. We've got these new ideas. We're listening to you. One other point I want to make about how do we do that is, we've got to attack that notion of, but this is how I do this work at its foundation. In our past, we've had training for green belts and black belts. We have, a yellow belt or foundational awareness course. We even help our leaders create a demand function by teaching them all of these continuous process improvement principles. We have master black belts. We have an executive course for general officers and senior executives. But one of the reflections that we learned is we're not going to really make any inroads to the cultural points that are the cultural transformation that we need until we quit thinking about continuous process improvement and innovation as a special skill that only certain people can have, right? So if you think about it for a minute, if we have undertaken this process, we have contracts in place so that we can have access to external experts from industry so we can bring in their master black belts and help us do our work. We are training our own green belts and black belts and master black belts, but those are simply internal consultants, right? So we have external and internal consultants to do this belt processes to help us analyze and get better from a process perspective. But is that the right best answer if cultural shift and transformation is your goal? I don't think so. So ultimately, we're on a path of transforming that. I'm on a path of making sure that every airman, when they come into basic military training, they head off to their technical training program, and then they, as they learn how to do their jobs, they are learning green belt principles, or to a green belt level of knowledge, if you will, and deployment embedded in the how they learn how to do their job and how to do their job. Because if we can put those principles in that work, then this is the way we've always done it goes away, right? So our goal is that we have every every apprentice or journeyman has green belt level skills. I want every frontline supervisor and every journeyman to craftsman and master craftsman and the officers that are in our Air Force and Space Force, I want them to have black belt level skills in terms of analysis and be able to gonculate and not be afraid of Six Sigma and calculators. I want every business unit lead to have master black belt level skills. And beyond just gonculation skills, I think they need to have those type of senior executive type interaction skills. They need to be able to talk about their issues from start to finish from a process perspective, and solutions perhaps from a business process reengineering and innovation. Clean sheet, let's throw the whole thing out and let's see what's really possible to deliver this capability. We need to embed those skills in the technical training programs that we're developing every airman with. At the end of the day, I want 685,000 belts, not just 1% and 5%, because that's what GE settled for in Jack Welch's book. So that's one of the paths we're on to mitigate a root cause issue. Airmen powered by innovation. That's our innovation program. We actually have a program that we put on for the Air Force and Space Force currently called Spark Tank. Every airman right now, ongoing campaign, is that they put their most innovative ideas in. They capture in video, just using their cell phones to record themselves capturing the essence of the issue and how they're thinking about solving it. They upload that through their public affairs offices into a channel. They compete, and we get it skinny down to where we get 6 finalists on stage. A couple of years ago, we even had Mark Cuban as one of our guest panelists. And and that varies. The guest panelists vary from year to year, but the secretary is there, the Secretary of the Air Force, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Raymond, Chief of Space Operations, was planning to be there for the next one that we have. And those 6 finalists get on stage and they pitch the sharks, if you will, and about their idea. And our leadership is all in. in helping make sure that they're doing this. Why? Because they believe that they have to make sure that every airman knows they're listening. Everything is about their airman's ability to bring solutions to the table, that they're thinking about transferring and making sure that airmen are comfortable and they know that their leadership believes in the value that they bring to the workplace every single day. That's critical, and that's a key part of our cultural transformation piece. The last little bit as I kind of close out here is about going digital. And I'm not going to do a whole lot on this, but I'll just say that I believe there's a role for belts in the future where we're talking about processes and converting value streams where you can see objects moving around very cleanly translates to business process modeling and software language for software architects and engineers. Understanding data dictionary, where authoritative data is. All of those data points, those data elements, those are simply inputs and outputs in a transactional work stream or workflow. And we're going to make sure that our belts understand that. We're going to make sure that our subject matter experts understand those concepts. And then we're going to help them through tools like our robotic process automation tools, through our mapping tools, help understand really the work they're doing and look for ways to slash it or improve it dramatically. Where will this change lead? We don't know. Ultimately, the future is unknowable. But we believe that by undermining or setting out the conditions for success, we will undermine the way we've always done it, and that we will get to a new future with the same, without sacrificing any capabilities whatsoever, and allow our Air Force and our Space Force to continue to excel at the business we do, because we're empowering our people and helping them make it happen. Think differently. That's our challenge. Stewardship, innovation, excellence. What questions can I answer for you?
Awesome, Brou. Very, very good. So we have questions coming in as you were speaking, and we have, and I strongly recommend that everybody keeps submitting your questions. I'm gonna pop up this question box here. And Brou, I'm gonna ask you to stop sharing your presentation at this time.
Okay.
And here we are. So I'm, let's see, the very first question that came up was related to, first of all, the quote on, there's a whole lot of software companies on the call right now. They're writing that as the new slogan for their company. IT can make stupid happen at the speed of light. So
absolutely. Just attributed to me circa 2008.
Well done. So one of the first questions that came up is that this is from one of the participants, that their vision of the Air Force and of course the military as a whole is that to function well, the military has a strong hierarchy and has top-down command and control. And how do you go from there, from that model, which is kind of the foundation of most military around the world, to one where you are trying to establish more of a collaborative culture? How does collaboration work in an environment that's fundamentally a hierarchical environment?
That's a great question. And, just like consultants go in and advise the leaders of business units on how to improve their business processes, they're doing the same kind of coaching services, if you will, for the people who are embedded in the hierarchy, right? So we're approaching them from the executive level. We have our own 3-star general equivalent in charge of our organization who has those kinds of conversations with general officers and senior executives every day. And then we're plugged in at every single level effectively with the bureaucracy to help coach and advise them that it's not about changing their outcome or necessarily how they're going up, what they're doing, the eaches. It's about changing the way they think about it. And by exposing them to different data points, we're able to help inform that conversation. So for instance, most people, it's kind of a natural thing, they tend to overly weight with bias how they see it done at their location today. But they have no idea, while I love my people and I believe that we're the best in the world at this, they have no real idea because we don't track that data per se, right? So one of the things that we're looking at doing is kind of help building models to help people understand who has, no kidding, the leading practice for doing any given thing in our Air Force or Space Force today, because that way now a leader then would have two data points, right? If I know how it's done today, and I know how what's perceived as the leading in the class and the business in this world and for this process or function, how they're doing it and their costs and their output and their consistency, then now I can say, are we better than that or worse than that? And then I can take that delta and I can say, what does it take to get us to there? Or maybe even to leapfrog and advance this for the Air Force. So we're taking advantage of those kind of competitive tendencies in the bureaucracy to be able to do that. But the big issue is we're having to bring market data, if you will, from other segments, like segments in our organization. And I'll say too that it's okay to not. One of the things that we're bringing is it's okay to not do any change whatsoever. It's okay to leave them with a delta, if that makes sense. For instance, we had one case where it had a great idea, improved a process from one of our airmen at a base in England, in the UK. And they found a different way of processing something, and it made a lot of sense to them, so they did it. We looked at doing that across the enterprise, but the folks in Texas said, you know, the reason that they're doing that, entertaining that, is because their costs are different for their, you know, whether it's environmental law-based cost or different things that drive the different actions. Their cost model is completely different than our cost model. And our cost model shows that it doesn't make sense for us to do that same investment because we won't reap that same benefit for 50 years beyond when they plan to reach theirs. So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make, from a dollars productivity standpoint, to be able to do that. And that's okay, right? We have to have the flexibility to allow that difference. The important point is that we gave that commander an option. We gave him market intelligence that showed there's a different way. And now that commander saw the delta and was able to explain it in a way that makes sense, and everybody goes, yeah, you're right. You keep thinking about ways to possibly improve that without necessarily doing the exact same thing they're doing there, and for different reasons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Very good, very good. Clarice Saunders posed a question related on how you started the journey, or how did the Air Force start their journey in terms of where they want to be. Well, is there a vision for the future here that drove this cultural transformation?
So yes, there absolutely there is. But you know, we as a big organization though, we probably suffer maybe a little more labor transiency than many other big organizations our size. For instance, our leadership, the Secretary of the Air Force, will change out every time there's a change in the political administration. And the political administration and the civilians run the military. When there's a change in philosophy at the top, then there's a small change in philosophy inside the bureaucracy. At the end of the day, though, we have to deliver the effects that our nation needs. So there came this call to be something that transcends the transitional nature of the leadership and even the bureaucratic management in the middle and the workforce below. So the Air Force, we're actually blessed a little bit in the sense that we have a better retention model than most of the other services. I think the Air Force tends to retain about 15% of its workforce to retirement eligibility. The Marines maybe are the least capable in that regard. They only retain about 3% of their people to retirement age. So that means that they have to invest in training programs that effectively can reproduce capability, and the Air Force doesn't have to rely on that a little bit as much. And that, as I covered in the presentation, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But the need for us was, we're still looking at what is, and we're saying, that's all we get for that amount of money, that it's got to be better. And so it was really the fiscal stewardship aspect at leadership levels that really drove home the need for us to have a continuing deployment of this type capability, so that we could have a theme that kept us going for a number of years. And we've been at this model for about 14 years now.
Very good, very good. In 2006, I was in a Six Sigma conference, a World Six Sigma conference, and Mike Kirby, then the Undersecretary of the Army, was talking about, the Six Sigma deployments at the Army and well, at the military in general. And he was dealing with like a $500 billion budget, and it was like incredible, greater than the GDP of most countries. And then the question to him, and I will pose the same question to you, was about how do you identify these opportunities for value creation? But he provided a very colorful answer to that, and I want to preface by saying what he shared with me, which was that, hey, listen, this is 2006, and I just came back from the Pentagon, and we're trying to dissolve our Y2K task force. Of course, the Y2K task force happening for the preparation for the year 2000. It's 2006. They still had like 50 plus people in the Pentagon working on that project. And he was trying to work it out. So his point was that it was a real challenge to identify the right opportunities for value creation because there is this real concern about budget cuts. So I'm curious today, you fast forward now, we're in 2020, in the Air Force, of course, how do you deal with that tension on trying to bring people in and collaborate to identify what can create the most value, but at the same time, there is this concern that we may lose budget. So how do you deal with things like that in the current scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question. And remember that first slide I showed said revenue minus converted capability equals 0, and that's the issue, right? It will get spent because the Congress appropriates it and authorizes it to be spent to produce the capability. But what they don't stipulate, and it's kind of implied, is that the spend should be smart, right? We should seek max return on every single tax dollar. I mean, that's just a fundamental element of our core values or who we are. That piece drives all of this discussion. And I will say that for a long time, our culture really was, let's not waste a single dollar, especially August timeframe. Everybody knows that when the fiscal year ends 1 October, August and September, we're rounding up all the extra unspent dollars and we're saying, what can we buy? And over time, the military's gotten a bad rap, deservedly so in many cases, where we buy things that seem to be silly because we need to spend the money, right? Or else the people who set the budgets may say, well, obviously you didn't need it, so therefore it's going to go away. And so that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, I think that in the approach we're taking, it's not that we're trying to drive to spend the money for spending the money's sake. There is another fundamental axiom that I didn't say in the presentation, and that's requirements always exceeds available resources, right? You never have enough money to do what needs to be done. You have a list of unfunded priorities from top to finish that we spend our money sometimes in the past foolishly on hammers or you name it, right? Bad things. We'll buy, hey, we need to recapitalize our computer monitors or our TV screens or whatever so that we have information flows. Well, those may be legit purchases, but the issue then becomes how prepared are leaders for that end of year spend? Is their list of unfunded requirements racked and stacked to be the most possible effect? And that's part of what we're attacking to make sure that we don't end up with that same culture, the mindless spend. Mindless spend is bad anywhere, but purposeful spend for all of the available resources you have at your disposal is critical at making sure that all of the most number of requirements can be satisfied with what resources are made available.
Brou, thank you so much for providing such great insights, sharing the journey with us in such an open way, and really, really great insights throughout your presentation. So good luck with the journey ahead. And again, much gratitude for taking the time to share with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jose. It's a privilege for me to be here. I'm honored and humbled that you guys asked me to share where we are and how we're going about it. And I truly hope that it was of value to those of the listeners all over the world. I was amazed. What an amazing presentation list. So thanks to Brian Reffel and all of the team putting this on. And thanks to you, sir. You've been a gracious host.
Thank you very much. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch. We'll continue to follow your journey. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this completes this segment. At the top of the hour, we're going to have directly from the United Arab Emirates, Ashtoshala Brou, the Chief Human Resources Officer from BMA International, discussing how we need to become Chief Culture Officers and what that means, what that role means. So as you close this session, there is a survey that you can fill out and provide any feedback. Also, we have discussions going on LinkedIn that will go on for the next few days. So feel free to join the discussion on LinkedIn and provide your comments, provide additional questions. We have speakers, myself, who will participate in the Q&A on LinkedIn as well. So for now, thank you very much. We'll close the session. We'll open back up at the top of the hour.